Right, well, here we are. It's Wednesday, the 26th of September, 2018. And I've been doing a bit of thinking. I know it's dangerous, doing that whole thinking thing. But the thing I've been thinking about is the basics that Hume talks about oughts and an ought versus an is. So we'll keep on this as Tuesday, September 25th because it's Eastern Time. Everything is now set, I think. I hope. Alright. Not looking here, about 1 minute and 28 seconds in, so I'll say. Alright. Here we go. So, Hume said, regarding moral distinctions not being derived from reason, in every system of morality which I have hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning, and establishes the being of a god, or makes observations concerning human affairs, when all of a sudden I am surprised to find that instead of the usual copulations of propositions, is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. This change is imperceptible, but is, however, of the last consequence. For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, 'tis necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable. How this new relation can be a deduction from others, which are entirely different from it. I am persuaded that a small attention to this point would subvert all the vulgar systems of morality, and let us see that the distinction of vice and virtue is not found merely on the relations of objects, nor is perceived by reason. So moral distinctions are not derived from reason. That's what Hume suggests. And given the fact that I'm a Lutheran, that actually feeds or leads pretty well into a slight explanation of the Lutheran understanding on the matter. The Lutheran understanding on the matter is exceedingly simple. That reason can be used in two ways. And it's with regard to the Holy Scriptures, meaning the Bible, basically. One is a ministerial use of reason, so basically one that assumes that something else, in the case of a Lutheran, it would be the Bible, but you could obviously have a ministerial use of reason to something else, some other set of principles some other axiomatic system that one would just consider as valid. And then you would use your reason as subservient to it. And a magisterial use of reason is an attempt to use reason, and reason alone, my reason that is, to come up with the axiomatic systems to begin with. And the reason that I find this whole ministerial versus magisterial use of reason thing so compelling is that if there happens to be something transcendent, if there happens to be something that just is way beyond anything that we can possibly imagine, then we're not shooting ourselves in the foot and completely denying its potential existence if it does, in fact, exist and have some sort of an impact on our lives. So whereas there is no rational 100% empirical proof of the transcendent, should it exist, and should there be some sort of moral order associated therewith, that allows us to kind of arbitrarily determine the role of our reason. And the role of our reason is, at least if I'm a Christian, to either think about things and then not be a Christian anymore, or to look deeper into things and see if, okay, there might be some other explanation when something doesn't immediately make sense. And at least from what I found, usually a contextual reading of the Bible tends to bring a lot of things into perspective. But at one point, this was the domain only of people that spent their entire life studying and so on. You wound up having the monks, you wound up having the priests, you wound up having the bishops, the cardinals, the pope. The Catholic Church had a monopoly on this. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with the Catholic Church's monopoly, but it was easy, because all you literally had to do was listen to somebody else. But if that somebody else was screwed up, then everything would be screwed up. Now that we have the Bible to read for ourselves, now that we have this stuff, we're able to reflect on. But that brings with it some other problems, namely that we don't wind up getting all of the context necessarily without going and searching for it. And so, a proper use of reason involves getting the contextual understanding of whatever it is that you're learning. If you are, for instance, learning economics and you don't learn about human nature, why it is that we do what we do, obviously, we can say, well, it's just obvious. Well, then why would somebody pay more for something and somebody pay less for the entire for something else? Why is elasticity in terms of say demand a thing? Or why is elasticity that if you go and you look at the basic principles of economics, you can't go and derive that why. You need to have some other framework from which you would derive the why, and then you can know the is, and then you can use it to your advantage in life. The real reason I was bringing this whole thing up, though, didn't really have too much to do with faith matters or with economics, but I was thinking mostly in terms of what constitutes a healthy family life. And regardless of whether you believe that experiences of transcendence are a thing, and I'm stealing Vogelinian language there, and I'm using it in a very tongue-in-cheek way. I don't think that it's necessarily the best a language, but it's already there in the body of literature for any of you that want to look it up. But if you're already if people have, and some would say, well, evolved to believe, and other people would say are created to believe, and so on. But let's go and take the evolutionary biology perspective and say, if people have certain inbuilt tendencies, certain expectations of life, certain ways that they just think that things go, if we are to understand that we are very, for instance, collectivistic when it comes to our own families and in groups. We, in many aspects as human beings, say that individualism breaks down at the level of a community, or especially at the level of a family. But then on a bigger scale that's not scalable, and we know that now to be the case due to Dunbar's number, which is approximately 148 people that one can keep track of and have close emotional connections with at any given time. So if we're looking at this particular hand that we're dealt, we can't really say anything other than these are the things that you can expect. But if you impose a particular moral framework upon all this, that is not based upon, and I'm going to put this one extra word in, human reason. If it is arbitrarily given, if it is either based on our feelings or based on what God says, or what have you, we can then look at it and say, well, okay, this is good, or this is bad, or what have you. Why do humans tend to be serially monogamous, and why do, for instance, the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam stress at least monogamy of the woman, of course. And then polygamy, in terms of the men, if you're talking about, for instance, Islam, or what was occasionally allowed in ancient days. Not saying that I'm a polygamist, but I can understand the ramifications of taking care of widows in days when there were wars and so on. It wound up becoming a necessity because you didn't have the same kind of social welfare nets that people had before, and the structure was patriarchal. But that kind of goes out of the scope of what we're talking about, because monogamy is kind of a thing. Well, why would that be? Why would that be viewed as good? Okay, we can go and come up with all these different oughts, but all we can ever do is say, well, you're going to statistically get these results or those results or whatever. And take a consequentialist view, or you could just say this is in and of itself something good. But then you can also have people that grew up in bad home environments. I'll put bad in air quotes for the sake of the discussion, but I would say objectively bad. Abusive environments. Ones where parents are definitely not doing unto their children as the children would want the parents to do, even were they responsible, mature adults. Neglect or abuse things of that nature, or they're living in a household where there's a bunch of strife, where mom and dad are constantly fighting with each other, or where mom and dad are living in different places because they haven't been able to get along, or because one or both of them is not only abusive to certain people, but they would be abusive to each other. So seeing that, growing up in that, and then coming to the conclusion that this is what marriage is might not necessarily be the wrong thing. This is what some people's marriages are. And it's very painful. But if you go from that and you go and say, well, this is what marriage ought to be. This is what marriage ought to be. This is what people aim for when they say, I'm going to get married. And they go and they think, well, look. And then you would go from the outside and look at it and say, well, so you want to get along for a few months, have mind-blowing sex for a while, and then have everything fall apart at the seams because there wasn't anything substantial to begin with, blah-de-blah-de-blah, and so on, until everyone's life goes to hell in a handbasket. No, that's not the kind of marriage I want. But I still do want marriage. And I would say that in spite of all my flaws, and in spite of all the flaws my wife has, we have a happy marriage. But it's not because we're deriving an ought from an is. In fact, I would say partially it's because our own parents on both sides of our family, hers and mine, had difficulties. Both her father and my father grew up in what would traditionally be considered unhealthy home environments, and somehow they both made it through. I wouldn't say unscathed, but they both made it through. My mom had a much nicer upbringing, still not devoid of problems. There were many, but I would say that she had a more healthy upbringing than my dad did. Of course, my grandfather, her dad died when she was 13 years old, so that tended to complicate her teenage years, and also, she had a good older brother who happened to take responsibility for the family and keeping everything going after their dad died. And similarly, my wife's mother had a much more healthy upbringing, not a perfect one by any stretch of the imagination. She grew up on a farm, kind of like my mom did. They wound up both learning the value of hard work and of dedication to what it is that you're doing, dedication to your family. The whole point is we all wind up having our stories, and we can of course go and say, well, I like this and I don't like that, and I'm going to do this and I won't do that, and develop our own moral systems that way. But if there is something objectively good, if there is something that is objectively good, you can't derive it in a philosophical argumentation sense from an is. My wife and I use an appropriate contextual, i.e., looking at the original text, understanding of the Bible to determine what our marriage is going to look like. This is very arbitrary. If we wouldn't have been born into the households that we were born into, and we wouldn't have had the kinds of lives that we did, who knows what would have happened. But we were, and so this is the kind of life that we have. These are the kinds of decisions that we have made in the kind of situation that we've fallen into. And in spite of all the difficulties, and I have to say that anyone who says that marriage is not difficult is very likely, based on what I've seen, a deluded or a newlywed. Now, there can be different levels of difficulty. It can be a much easier marriage than the home life you had growing up. But no matter what, you're going to wind up dealing with what happens when you take two different people and put them into the same household. And so that's why having principles is such a good thing. You wind up having this external structure imposed upon things that people consensually agree to. In the form of, say, wedding vows. I agree to do, and then traditionally, there's a traditional set of wedding vows, so people use new wedding vows, whatever it may be, but there are vows that are given in the presence of witnesses that they can go and say, yep, you promised that. Yep, you promised that. Now do it. So the institution is there to both provide social pressure, and then, if you do believe in God, say, okay, in front of God and everybody, I promise this. And therefore, this is not just a promise to me or just a promise to my wife, but this is a promise in front of everyone, and probably to everyone, given the fact that the family is the integral part of society. But notice that this entire conversation, this entire monologue that I've been giving for the past 20 minutes or so, is predicated upon the idea that marriage as set forth in the Bible is good. Right? And if you go and you take that away, then you wind up having to construct, okay, well, what is it that we should do? Then it winds up becoming a question, okay, what do you want? And I'm not going to stand in the way of people going for what they want, as long as they don't step on other people. Your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. But that doesn't stop me from having the right to come out here and say, this is how I'm doing things. And since it seems like so few people have the guts to come and actually say things the way they are, if they're in my shoes, or in the shoes of someone similar to me in a similar life circumstance, in a similar family to what I have, I'm doing it. And that can easily set me up as looking like the pretentious jerk that knows everything. I mean, I don't know much of anything. I've only been married for the better part of a single decade. There are people that have been married for 50 years. And if you want to know how to be married 50 years, then go talk to them. But realize that there's also survivorship bias there. What happens if you die 40 years into it? What happens if you had a terrible life for the first 30 years of it, but decided to stick it out? Well, I mean, you can learn something from that. But I think that it's very important I think that family is very important. It plays a crucial role in our own mental health and our own well-being, as well as in the maintenance of society. And that's interestingly something that differentiates people with different value systems from each other. The idea of loyalty as a value is very different across different cultural elements. And it isn't immediately understood how it might even be useful now. I mean, I'm sure that we can all agree that it would have been useful in tribalistic times, where a bunch of tribes would be infighting and and you were loyal to your tribe. The thing is, we haven't lost that psychology yet. We haven't lost that brain pattern. We are inherently, to some extent or another, tribalistic. But still, people would say, well, there isn't necessarily a compelling case for being loyal to anyone except for myself. Well, I would say if you're being loyal to yourself, oftentimes, in fact, a great deal of the time, it means putting others' needs ahead of your own. And coming from somebody who's a hyper-capitalist like me, that would sound very strange. It's more like I'm an individualist. But under the understanding that we as individuals are designed to work in communities. And if the process of being a member of a community is consensual, if you can leave at any time you don't like something, but any fear of any repercussions happening whatsoever, then I would think that left to their own devices, without a huge overarching governmental body, the people will be able to live as communities. And many people might make the argument, well, then you wind up going back to tribalism, and you wind up going back to having a bunch of fighting and a bunch of wars and murder rates of 1 in 14 and what have you, just like occurred many hundreds of years ago, many thousands of years ago. Given what we've done, I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't necessarily think that that would happen if we went in and had communities, because we could still have these basic human rights. The right to life, liberty, and property are good ones, because then no matter what happens in my group, our group isn't going to violate this other group's right to life, liberty, and property, or anyone in that group. So it's not that this whole family thing is screwed up. I would say that it's an arbitrary construct that works very, very well. And I will say that one ought to live in a family or a community. I say that's an intrinsic good, and then the other argumentations that I give are on top of that. Some of the arguments aren't very good for mental health. some of the other arguments given is that you can make sure that if you're in a position of taking care of those that actually matter to you, that you can. And if you are young or inexperienced, or if you are hurt or something, you will have people to pull you up. And it doesn't need to be done in an impersonal way, an inefficient impersonal way, as would be done in the case of bigger government safety nets and so on. I've heard different claims, and you can evaluate them for whatever you think that they're worth. I've had claims that a social welfare state isn't collectivistic, it's very individualistic, that we're taking care of the needs of every single individual. In fact, I've heard it say that it's hyper-individualistic, because you're going and you're saying each individual has a right to X standard of living, as defined in a certain dollar amount or euro amount or what have you. The difference is everyone is there entitled to some other right besides life, liberty, and property under this big, gigantic, overarching umbrella that doesn't take into account essentially the economy, meaning more like the economy of scale, of dealing with Dunbar's number, of dealing with things like family, and understanding the horrible implications of, and see, here I am imputing value here, and I'm saying an ought, an indirect ought statement, understanding the horrible implications of having a large centralized government filling the role of family. And the reason that I brought up Hume in the first place is because he argues that moral distinctions are not derived from reason. And yet, you wind up having people saying #science. Science says this, science says that. And then you go and you put this facade of reason over this whole idea of how people should behave. While you wind up putting this facade of reason over everything else. Oh, well, we should do this because of that. We should do this because of that. And you wind up having all these oughts and ises being mixed in ways that aren't actually philosophically valid. And now where you have those oughts and you have those ises mixed in a way that's not philosophically valid, but portrayed as such, if it winds up becoming a mantra, if it winds up becoming, dare I say, a religion of sorts, the least thing we all can do is be honest with ourselves what religion it is that we're following. Now, of course, I'm not necessarily using religion to even mean that there is a deity whatsoever, in the traditional sense of a deity. But I find my INTJ buddy Luther's categorization of religion as something pretty interesting, to say the very least. So, the first of the Christian commandments, at least for Lutherans and Catholics, is you shall have no other gods. And Luther says very pointedly here in his large catechism, now I say that whatever you set your heart on and put your trust in is truly your God. If we're not even as deistic people, Lutherans, even as people that believe in a triune God, as received through the Holy Scripture, we go and say, well, the idea of a God in general does not mean some person in the sky or somebody who came down to earth and died on a cross, or somebody who's represented as a dove and comes down and does things and whatever. But a God is quite simply whatever you set your heart on and put your trust in. And so, if you're going and making a dogmatic statement of, I put my trust in this is what I believe is right, this is what I'm hanging my hat on, this is the societal structure that is a natural consequence thereof, this is my axiomatic system, well, that in and of itself winds up becoming then a God. Using the older term, using Luther's understanding of the word God, and that's the understanding of the word God that I'm going to be having for the rest of however long this discussion takes. You can have hashtag science being your God, which is interesting because it's a method of empirical verification of certain things. But still, there winds up being this jump. There are always jumps in science. We can understand certain things that are related, but we can't understand other things that don't, and never can conclusively have a causal relationship inferred. Those are relegated to being matters of faith. And so maybe it would be best if people were to not falsely advertise what they're saying. If you believe in the use of the scientific method, you have Christians and atheists both who do that. If you don't believe in the scientific method, if you think that it's a bad way of getting to information, which I don't, I think that it's an excellent way of getting to information that is within the domain of science, then say that. But I think we should be clear as to what we mean about all of our terms, because if we are defining terms differently here and there and everywhere, and we're dealing with inconsistent definitions within different axiomatic systems, we can often wind up talking past each other rather than talking to each other when it comes time to interact and solve the problems that exist in the world. But in order to do that, that requires a great deal of patience. It requires a great deal of understanding. And so I think that just being able to define terms would be a good thing. Once again, I made an odd statement. I didn't derive it from any statement. I'm just saying that odd statement. I believe that it would be better to be able to discuss things from first principles onward and have open and honest conversations from right to left to up to down, in to out and all about, and all the rest of it. I think that would help, but that also requires us to not necessarily even suspend judgment, but to make sure that we understand different positions in their strongest and most nuanced form before coming to our final conclusion of the matter. And as more information becomes available, I think we should integrate it into our model and into our understanding of the world in order to be well educated in the things that actually could potentially help us to live a good life. That is my suggestion. My statement, my assertion, is that, well, I don't even need to phrase this as an assertion, based on what I have seen, based on both the Bible, my life, based off of reason, based off of having seen these principles in action consistently or in not consistently, and seeing the results that have happened as a consequence, I think that in spite of what many people say about relationships being not worth it, life being not worth it, nihilism knocking at the door, and all the rest of it, I would say that there are things in life that are inherently good, and it might behoove us to seek these things, and if they can't be gotten in the world of modernity, then maybe we should be looking to something else. Maybe we should be looking to doing things in accordance with ancient wisdom, not because ancient wisdom is ancient, but because ancient wisdom has lasted. I know there's a distinction between those two. One is because it's old, we listen to it. The other is because something has made it this far, because it has lasted so far, there must have been some reason that people picked it up. There must have been some reason that it was good and didn't get thrown out. Let's figure out what that reason is. And rather than arbitrarily going based off of tradition, carefully looking at the traditions and extracting the valuable elements from them. We don't need to limit ourselves to the short-sighted lens that modernity provides us. All right. We're now 43 minutes and 10 seconds in. We will have now an 8-minute intermission. And after intermission, we will resume. And we will talk about the 4th book of the Iliad. There we go. Right. Well, we're back. And at least it seems like, see, I'm this kind of a person that does really, really horribly with surprises. And I would suggest that after stream, I'm going to be taking a look at, and I'll actually put it up there now if I can get to Quora. One of our viewers has put a piece together. I have no idea what it's about, on the Quora Gifted Support Group blog. Hi, it's not showing up. Well, either way, whenever it does happen to show up, I'll definitely share it. With you guys, and suggest that you take a look at it, giving feedback and whatnot. Be very, very good. Called it Some Creative Writing. Okay, good. So, Mr. Legolas Bowmaster, not his real name, of course, put a piece together. I'll definitely take a look after streaming. Of course, it's going to take a little while longer, because after streaming, I'm going to be going on a run with a friend. A friend who may, at some point, appear on stream. I don't know if I've convinced him yet to do that. I don't know how easy he would be to convince to do that, but he's expressed at least a little bit of willingness to do that sort of a thing, so you may get a chance to meet him. Oh, I'm glad you appreciate my time. I appreciate you guys taking the time to come here and listen and to interact and so on. It makes doing this whole thing, doing it as a stream, a lot more fun than doing it just as a video and talking to myself. So, time to go and open the Iliad, book 4, lines 121 and following. So Pallas spake, to whom infatuate he, listening uncased at once his polished bow. That bow the laden brows of a wild goat, Salacious had supplied him on a day. Forth issuing from his cave in ambush placed, he wounded with an arrow to his breast, dispatched, and on the rock supine he fell. Each horn had from his head tall growth attained, full 16 palms, then shaven smooth the smith had aptly joined and tipped their points with gold. That bow he strung, and stooping planted firm. The nether horn his comrades bold the while, screening him close with shields, lest ere the prince were stricken, Menelaus brave in arms, the Greeks with fierce assault should interpose. He raised his quiver's lid, he chose a dart, unflown, full-fledged, and barbed with pangs of death. He lodged in haste the arrow on the string, and vowed to Lycian Phoebus, bow renowned, a hecatomb, all firstlings of the flock, to fair Zelea's walls once safe restored. Compressing neck's nerve and notched arrowhead, he drew back both together to his pap, drew home the nerve, the barb home to his bow, and when the horn was curved to a wide arch, he twanged it, whizzed the bowstring and the reed, leaped off, impatient for the distant throng. The Menelaus then the blessed gods forgat not. Pallas huntress of the spoil. Thy guardian then, baffled the cruel dart, far as a mother wafts the fly aside, that haunts her slumbering babe, so far she drove, its course aslant directing it herself, against the golden clasps that joined his belt, for there the doubled hauberk interposed. The bitter arrow plunged into his belt, it pierced his broader belt, stood fixed within, his twisted hauberk, nor the interior quilt, the penetrable least to arrow points. And his best guard withheld it, but it passed, that also, and the hero's skin inscribed, quick flowed a sable current from the wound. As when a Carian or Maeonian maid, in purple's ivory ordained to grace, the cheek of martial steed safe stored it lies, by many a chief desired, but proves at last the stately trapping of some prince, the pride of his high pampered steed, nor less his own. Such Menelaus seemed, thy shapely thighs, thy legs, thy feet stained with thy trickling blood. Shuddered King Agamemnon when he saw the blood fast trickling from the wound no less. Shuddered himself, the bleeding warrior bold, but neck and barb observing from the flesh, extant, he gathered heart and lived again. The royal Agamemnon, sighing, grasped the hand of Menelaus, and while all their followers sighed around them, thus began. I swore thy death, my brother, when I swore this truce, and set thee forth in sight of Greeks and Trojans. Our sole champion for the foe hath trodden underfoot his sacred oath, and stained it with thy blood, but not in vain. The truce was ratified, the blood of lambs poured forth, libation made, and right hands joined. In holy confidence the wrath of Jove may sleep, but will not always. They shall pay dear penalty. Their own obnoxious heads shall be the mold, their children and their wives. For this I know surely, that a day shall come when the warlike king of Ilium and his host shall perish all. Saturnian Jove, high-throned, dwelling in heaven, resentful of this outrage, then shall shake his storm-clad aegis over them. He will. I speak no fable, time shall prove me true. But, O my Menelaus, dire distress awaits me if thy close of life be come, and thou must die. Then ignominy foul shall hunt me back to Argos long desired. For then all here will recollect their home, and hope abandoning will Helen yield, to be the boast of Priam and of Troy. So shall our toils be vain, and while thy bones shall waste these clods beneath Troy's haughty sons, the tomb of Menelaus glory crowned, insulting barbarous shall scoff at me. So may Atrides, shall they say, perform his anger still as he performed it here, whither he led an unsuccessful host, whence he hath sailed again without the spoils, and where he left his brother's bones to rot. So shall the Trojan speak, then open earth her mouth and hide me in her deepest gulfs. So Agamemnon, after Menelaus is shot, and he's shot in complete violation of the oath made. There was an oath made that, in the previous book, that Menelaus and Paris, Menelaus, who was the husband of Helen, and Paris, who essentially took her away. You could say kidnapped, but the willingness is kind of whatever. They were fighting over Helen, and the agreement was that nobody else would interfere, that it would be a fight to the death. Paris almost died, but he avoided death. He ran away from the fight. And now there was this uncomfortable truce between the Greeks and the Trojans. Menelaus, of course, came from Greece, and Paris came from Ilium or Troy. And then, in our previous reading at the beginning of Book 4, we found that Minerva went and convinced Laodocus, and convinced Pandarus. Minerva dressed up as Laodocus and convinced Pandarus to shoot Menelaus in violation of the oath, promising him or getting him to think, oh, there's going to be all this riches and reward and all this other crap for you. If you violate this oath, people will look up to you, etc. Which, kind of reminds me of how people tend to justify their violations of oaths. Now, just go and you think about it from the perspective of short-term gratification. Oh, all I got to do is shoot this guy and I'll be able to win favor. Sign me up. And then when you finally do, then, well, war starts. And this is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. This is the event. We're 4 books in. But this is the event that actually precipitated the Trojan War. Now, of course, you wind up having disagreements as to whether or not any of this stuff actually took place. But right now we're just going to speak of it as if it were reasonable to believe it as a historical fact. We can go and have a separate discussion about whether or not it actually happened. So ultimately the war, as famously recorded, happened due to a breach of an oath. Partially you can say yes, it was because of A. It was because Paris absconded with Helen, or B, because the Greeks went to back up Menelaus in the first place, or C, because Paris ran away, or D, because Menelaus was shot under conditions of truce. And I think that brings up a very important point for us to learn from today, which is if and that's the other thing, is if you're operating in the name of someone else, don't do anything that would reflect poorly on that person. Don't do anything that would cause him to break a vow. Just don't do it. It's incredibly important. It is incredibly important in terms of maintaining your own integrity and helping others maintain theirs. Because if all else put aside, if you have your integrity, if your word means something, yes, Jack, you bear their image. And I will go ahead and say that forcing somebody else whom you've made a promise to suffer based upon your own lack of judgment is not a good thing. It's wrong. Once again, that's an ought statement. But it's from a consistent moral framework. Because let's say everything that you have is taken away. Let's just say everything everyone has is taken away, and all we ever have is our memories of interactions with other people. And we're forced to start everything anew. Or we don't even have memories quickly. The trustworthy people will be known. You don't want to do deals with untrustworthy people. You don't want to engage with them. If we're going to talk about the dichotomy of order and chaos, yeah, sure, we can fight against the chaos together. But if you have somebody that half the time is going to do something with you and half the time is going to go and foil you, you don't want to have that person on your team. And if what that person does is severe enough to cause tremendous damage, that might render him an enemy. And so when all things come to a head, one's word and one's ability to trust someone else to carry out his word is of utmost importance. That's what contracts are. That's what contracts are. Contracts are nothing more than a document indicating the specifics of what it is that are agreed to. And once that signature is on that document, you promise to do what you do. Now, in different cultures, it can be different things. It can be, at some points in history, it has been blood sacrifices. Sometimes a handshake. A handshake, the word is your bond, and you give a handshake. You don't even need a document. Because ultimately, that's how deals are made. Money helps make things easier. Riches don't make things easier, but deals are ultimately how we all get ahead. And that is why people so ubiquitously hate confidence men. People hate con men because their whole job is gaining the confidence of other people and screwing them. Now, I would say that there's an awful lot of signs that you're dealing with a con man that many people might not notice. But ultimately, I would say that the moral burden to bear is on the con man. And then I've been the art of deception. I've been in many situations where I have made promises to other people and have had people, sometimes people very close to me, doing things that have rendered fulfilling these promises very difficult. Then it can be intentional, or it can be completely accidental. But I think that this generally takes place because of the value that people do or do not put on one's word. And if reputation is everything. Reputation is everything. And if you, through your actions, destroy someone else's reputation, that is just as, if not more destructive, than taking away someone's property. I would say that you own your reputation, so it is property, but it's not tangible in the same sense that, this cup belonging to me is, or this mug belonging to me is. Obviously, you take this, it becomes, it's a very obvious transgression against me. You are obviously, if you take my cup away, you've stolen from me. But if you slander me, you lie about me, or if you go and you make people think that I've made some sort of a promise or broken it or done things, you engage in business on my behalf without my consent and put me into a bad situation where my name is ruined, you have taken away my reputation, which is, though not as tangible, a far more valuable asset than my cup. And especially being the kind of person I am, and having my word mean as much to me as it does, it hurts to have to pick up the pieces. It hurts to have to burn the midnight oil when I wasn't otherwise planning on doing it. It hurts. I do my best. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I do my best to keep my word. There are conditions that I can't. 102 feet or I won't stream. Things of that nature. But I'm pretty sure that that's kind of in the implicit understanding of the situation for most people. Like work contracts. You have a work contract more often than not, you have this thing that if you're sick, you don't have to show up to work. And sometimes you need verification, and doctors notes and whatnot. But there are these other things that are going on that extenuating circumstances. But I still hate them. But if there's something that is if there's something that you've gone and promised is absolutely abundantly clear, and there's somebody just is completely heedless of it, that very much makes me wonder, can I trust that person? How trustworthy is that person? What do I let this person in on? And that's why, at least from what I've seen, so many successful businessmen tend to keep people at arm's length and tend to be very hesitant to promise anything. And then when you do promise, you put in safeguards to make sure that things take place. Now, I have a particular scenario that's actually eating away at me right now. And it's something I'm going to wind up having to deal with. And I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to slander somebody else, especially given the fact that I know that it's, or I'm almost certain that this sort of a thing is not intentional. But nevertheless, if ever you do wind up being in a position of causing somebody to not be able to fulfill a promise or of making it considerably more difficult, one of the very best things you can do, or one of the very best things anyone can do, is to be truly sorry for what it is, to indicate it, say, I am sorry, or if it's not possible to do that, to write a note saying, I am sorry. And what does that sorry mean? I mean, it can mean I feel badly about it, but people can feel badly and still operate against their feelings, so it needs to be more than just that. And you don't even need to feel badly in order to be sorry. You can resolve to not do something again. I am, but if you go and say, I am sorry, and you actually demonstrate contrition. I am sorry. I will not do that again. I don't want to do that again, and it is my intention never to do that again. Here are some of the safeguards I've put into place. This is how I'm going to make it more clear. Will you forgive me? And that's important. Will you forgive me? Because lots of people hate apologies, both giving them and receiving them. And when you receive an apology, the appropriate answer is not, that's okay. Because when you say that's okay, that minimizes what it is that somebody else did. You go and you say, well, what you did, that didn't actually hurt me. Now, if it didn't hurt you, then you can go and say, well, that didn't actually hurt me. This might have been something that you're taking very seriously. But in order to assuage your conscience, I forgive you. Or if it is very big, then you have to think, well, am I going to forgive that? And forgiveness can be hard. But forgiving is way better than saying that's okay. Of course, that's not how it happened with the Trojan War. But dealing with violations, dealing with transgressions, dealing with these very, very difficult situations comes up as a regular part of life. And you wind up having so many people saying, well, don't apologize, it shows weakness. Well, don't make excuses, that shows weakness. Apologizing for failure and owning up to what you do, good or bad, being truthful, that shows strength. So, if there is something to be learned from this, and it's not directly learned, the first thing to learn is don't violate your word. But then something secondary to that, which is actually more important, that if you do, or if you do anything, wrong. Now, I'm not going to say, like, hiding Jews during World War II. Don't apologize for that. Don't ask forgiveness for that. But if you're doing something wrong and you've wronged someone else, then going through the process of giving a proper apology is I would say the only right thing to do. Being willing to take responsibility for one's actions is the mark of a mature person. Making excuses is for cowards. Don't think that you're showing weakness by apologizing for wrongdoing. Don't apologize for mistakes, but if those mistakes hurt somebody, then you apologize for them. But if it's just something, silly, like, oops, I was drinking from this cup and somehow the cup just fell apart from its handle. Well, if this all of a sudden were to fall apart from this, and this cup belonged to somebody else, I wouldn't necessarily hold myself responsible if all I was doing was drinking normally. But if I were swinging the cup around, hitting it up against the wall or something, or I don't know, let's say I were completely smashed and I was at some bar or something and I destroyed a beer glass or something, then the onus is definitely on me. And of course there are different societal rules as to whose responsibility it is to pay for things that wind up being the cost of doing business. But don't try to neglect your responsibility. In fact, that is, I would say, both in terms of manhood and womanhood, one of the most important things any of us can ever learn. And when it comes to the fact that we don't have any coming of age rituals too much anymore. I mean, you might have graduation or something, but we don't really have any rituals indicating that we're taking responsibility for something, or that I'm actually going to go and do real things. I would suggest that dependability and establishing yourself as a dependable, trustworthy person is an integral part of that whole process. It's not easy. It's not easy. So just keeping promises can hurt. Keeping promises can hurt big time. But ultimately, your reputation, my reputation, matters. And especially in the digital age where there's a record of everything, little indiscretions can turn big. And they can haunt you for a long time. I've seen it happen, and it's definitely not worth it. So as Hyde said, something about having some other piece for me to take a look at. If you send it to me, say via Quora, I'll take a look at it before next stream, and we can talk about that. And then Jack also had a piece that he wrote for a Quora blog, and I will take a look at that also before the next stream, assuming that I'm able to either get the Quora message or find the post. We'll see you guys later. For next stream, if it makes sense to do in the span of one stream, I don't know how long it will take. I don't know what the article is, but if you send it to me, I promise I'll take a look at it and attempt to do it justice in next stream, along with continuing a bit of reading from the Iliad and so on. Does that work for you? Yes, please do send it now. Please do send it now. All right, great. Well, I am going to then finish up with the rest of my morning things and get ready to go on a run with a dear friend. And then get to work on all the other things we need to do today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye.